Again, good morning, everyone. Welcome on the Social History of Cooperative Institutions panel session. This session is a continuation of yesterday's session, which was really interesting. We had three presentations, one about 19th century Italy, another one about Poland, and another one about Croatia. And the session revolved around issues of cooperative autonomy, their relationship to politics, and their relationship to the state. Today we continue this session, and I would like to introduce Professor Patrizia Battilani from the University of Bologna, and Dr. Torsten Lorenz from Freie Universität Berlin. And I think we can begin. So Professor Battilani, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thanks so much for your introduction. So my presentation is about the Italian cooperatives. I changed the century to respect with the presentation I given yesterday about Italy, and in the sense that I moved toward the turn of the new century between the 20th century and the 21st century. The focus is on the attempt made by the Italian cooperative movement to generate social innovation throughout the commoning process with the invention of community cooperatives. And so the first point is, what are community cooperatives? How can we consider these cooperatives? A new typology of cooperatives. I say new typology because we will see that the isolation made possible for them to have as a member both institutions, public institutions, and also volunteers. Or are there a new phase in the history of cooperatives? We will see that one of the new narratives that developed around community cooperative focus on this aspect. Or are they an example, a new model of collaboration between different components, the different components of our society, that is residents, public institutions, enterprises, non-profit association, and so on? Or they are simply a result of a common process following a bottom-up approach, bottom-up process. So I hope that we can debate on these questions at the end of the presentation. But let me start saying something about the situation of Italian cooperative movement at the turn of the century. And well, one point is that the Italian cooperative movement has been traditionally characterized by a high degree of institutional innovation. And this attitude usually has become particularly strong on occasion of economic and social crisis. And so, for instance, in the 2 decades that followed the oil crisis, that is during the 70s and the 80s, the Italian cooperative movement experienced, developed 2 parallel strategies, which brought to some kind of innovation. We will see not only social innovation, but also a sort of hybridization. Well, this crisis stimulated an important institutional change in terms of creating a new legal framework stimulating the cooperative capitalization. So the crisis made clear that many cooperatives were undercapitalized, and as a consequence, the cooperative movement tried to get national legislation stimulating cooperatives to capitalize. And over the long term, the result of this attitude was, of this strategy was the growth of large cooperative groups that became able to dominate the industry in which they operated. I provide here some examples. The consumer is the number one in mass retailing. Conad, that is the most important retailer cooperatives in Italy, is the number two in mass retailing. Granarolo, that is a farmer cooperative producing meats and cheese and so on, that is the number two in this sector. So there was, after the oil crisis, there was an innovation, institutional innovation, that stimulated the development of large cooperative groups that sometimes are represented as the consequence of a sort of hybridization between cooperative instances and the corporation and the conventional enterprises. Parallel to this change, there was another change that went in the opposite direction, that is the social innovation and the invention of cooperatives able to cater for the basic needs of urban population and also rural, but above all the urban population. And that were the social cooperatives. Social cooperatives started to develop in Italy since the 70s, according to some scholars, even since the 60s. And they were the result of a bottom-up process. And they represented an attempt to find solution to the pressing issues generated by urbanization, by the existence of many disadvantaged group of people in the urban context. And they tried this kind of cooperatives. They started to provide services to different categories of people, older people, children, and people with some kind of disabilities, and even people, and even in general, disadvantaged people. And social cooperatives in many parts of Italy became an important instrument, an important tool for the organization of welfare services. And the law that recognized this new type of cooperatives was passed in 1991. So you can see that an innovative attitude generating different, I have to say also opposite model of cooperative. Then another typology, another innovation that started to emerge in the same decades is the development of the worker buyout cooperatives, or the empresa recuperada, as they are called in Latin America. And I think that this kind of cooperative has been mentioned yesterday in one of the keynote speech. And so During the 80s, new legislative framework tried to stimulate this kind of solution for companies that were in difficulty. And so the law in 1985 stimulated the redundant workers to set up new crops. Then in 2013, cooperatives, I mean worker buyout cooperatives, were given the right of the first refusal in case of company in difficulty or part of it were sold or rented. And in addition to that, also an institutional player facilitating the setup of worker buyout cooperatives was invented, was created, the Cooperazione Finanza Impresa, Cooperation Finance Enterprise. This institutional player was set up by the cooperative umbrella organizations, the cooperative confederations, and was also partly financed by the Ministry of Economic Development. So, in this way, the new worker buyout cooperatives were accompanied in the early stage, both by cooperative confederation and the state. And some data you can see here from 1986 to 2016, the evolution of worker buyouts. And you can see here that they were above all a solution for middle-sized companies in difficulty. And so you can see that another interesting kind of cooperative started to develop in those years. Well, this is the context in which the 2008 crisis broke out. And I have to say that the cooperative movement was able to react very well to this crisis, and they reacted better than the conventional enterprises. And one of the reasons was that many cooperative enterprises, above all the large cooperative groups, were well capitalized. And so they could cope with this crisis, avoiding to fire workers or downsize their activity. And this is in line with that literature that work on the resilience of cooperative enterprises, in the sense that that crisis really showed how cooperative enterprises can be resilient in the context of crisis. So the question now is, why the community cooperatives in this context? I mean, I presented a very positive context for the Italian cooperative movement, with some large group, well operated, well run from the financial point of view, and able also to promote many activities, community-based activities to improve the quality of life of the regions, of the areas in which they operate. And then we have seen that there was also, I would say, another branch of the cooperative movement focusing on the social dimension of cooperatives, and also the worker buyout cooperative. So a way to answer to the issue of the industrialization and the issue of financial crisis of medium-sized enterprises. Well, so why to promote another kind of cooperatives, the community cooperatives? Well, the point was that After the 2008 crisis, it became clear, it became evident that Italy were facing not only an economic crisis, but also a huge social crisis. And this social crisis required new solutions, required to try to experiment new solutions. And because apart from the 2008 crisis, there was also a general lack of trust in the political life and in the traditional party that was the consequence of the greatest political scandal of Italian Republican history, named the Clean Hands, that created really a huge gap between citizens and the political life and the political process. And in addition to that, there was a growing demand for new forms of citizens' participation and the management in running and operating also abandoned buildings or in managing park cities. I mean, the desire of residents to be proactive in shaping the place in which they live. And finally, there was also an issue connected to the hyper-urbanization of the last decades that had depopulated and in some time also cultural and economical and depleted the many small towns, particularly in mountains, particularly in marginal regions, marginal areas, as for instance the mountain range of the Apennines. And consequently, shops, post office, recreational activities in these small towns started to close down. And the answer to, the cooperative movement looking for an answer to this kind of problem, started to foster a new form of cooperatives, the community cooperative, strictly linked, more linked to the community in which they were set up. And these community cooperatives try to get many goals, creating new job opportunities, providing the services that we're missing, promoting sustainable tourism, protection of environmental and monumental assets, and also the promotion of the local culture, the community culture. In addition to the effort given by the Cooperative Confederation, also the regions played an important role. As you know, Italy is organized in 20 regions. The administrative life in Italy is organized through 20 regions, and some of them started to pass laws on community cooperatives. And the first one was the Puglia region, that provided also the first definition of community cooperatives, simply saying that in this cooperative you can have as a member natural person, legal person, non-profit association, and foundation based in the community, and also public institutions, including the municipality. And another region that became active in this sense was the Emilia-Romagna region, that connected the setup of community cooperative with the policy aiming at fostering the participatory process in the region. So you can see here the link with the political crisis and the attempt to foster solutions stimulating citizens to be part of the decision-making process. So you can see here the financing of projects based on participatory on the involvement of citizens. And in addition to that, there was also a role played by the universities and research centers that provided a new narrative for these cooperatives. And in some cases, these cooperatives were represented as the natural development of the original cooperative feelings. And in other cases, other scholars went beyond that, describing community cooperatives as the culmination of a centuries-old evolution that moved the center of gravity of cooperatives from the members to the community. So, I mean, a sort of huge transformation, a new phase in the history of the cooperative. Well, apart from that, anyway, the development of community cooperatives was above all a bottom-up process, in the sense that since the 90s, the new cooperatives based on the local community and finding a way to preserve the local community and the local culture had been set up. For instance, the cooperative Valle dei Cavalieri, that means Valley of the Knights. And I'm not going to tell the history of this cooperative. I want only to focus on this sentence, on the claim, on the sentences said by one of the founding fathers of this cooperative. Suciso, that is the small village in which this cooperative is based, could have been a ghost town. Instead, it is alive. So this is the goals, the sense, and also the mission of this cooperative, to keep Suciso alive. This cooperative was set up when the last shop and bar of the village closed down, and started to provide this kind of services to residents, and after that to tourists. And then they started also to grow animals, to cultivate land, and so on. Another example is Brigante del Cerreto. So these cooperatives were set up before the idea of community cooperatives started to emerge. But the point is that in 2010, when the strategies of the cooperative movement was to stimulate this new generation of cooperatives, the point is that they said these two cooperatives, Valle dei Cavalieri and Brigante del Cerreto, these two cooperatives are community cooperatives. This is the model, this is the example, and this is a bottom-up example. You can see here how many community co-ops there are now in Italy. Not many, I have to say, 109. And you can see that most of them operate in the tourism, agriculture, and cultural sector, and another important percentage provide care services. So, in the end, what are community cooperatives in the Italian experience? Well, I would describe them through the quadruple helix. I don't know if you are familiar with this model, with this scheme. The quadruple helix is a way to represent the cooperation that is needed in a community to guarantee the full participation of all the components of society. And I think that this is really an example of quadruple helix, where both the local government, both academia, both the enterprise in the sense of cooperative enterprises and the civil society try to work together within the same institution, and this institution is the community cooperative. And then what's commons and communists, did they play a role? Well, the cooperative Valle dei Cavalieri and also the cooperative Brigante del Cerreto, they are an example of commoning process. But the point I want to focus on my presentation is that common process need to be supported with the proper institutional legal framework. And so in the end, I would prefer to describe the community cooperative as an example of quadruple helix, where a strong link and collaboration between academia, civil society, that is residents and non-profit organization, and local government, and finally enterprises, in the sense that this cooperative must to prepare a report at the end of the year and must have their budget in balance. So community cooperative, according to me, can be described as a common process aiming at providing a quadruple helix model of cooperation. That is, sorry if I took too much time for my presentation. And your microphone, you have to open your microphone. Okay.
I'm sorry. Thank you very much, Professor Battilani, for the interesting presentation. So now we move to the presentation of Dr. Torsten Lorenz, Cooperatives and Civil Society, Historical Evidence from Central and Eastern Europe, circa 1850-1940. So please, the floor is yours.
Okay, I hope you can hear you and see me. Do you see my presentation?
Yes.
Yes, yes.
Oh, okay, fine. Thank you. So thank you for the invitation. Yeah, I'm looking forward to discussions in this panel. So in a small difference from the original topic, I will confine myself to the example of Wielkopolska because that's what I managed to do before the conference. This is the region from which I take my examples, and my presentation will be a historical presentation, but I hope it will be interesting for you. So in 1907, the German economist Ludwig Bernhard published the first edition of his book Die Polenfrage, the Polish community in the Prussian state. This extensive study met with great public interest because of the continuing intensification of the German-Polish nationality struggle. It was commented on by economists and politicians on both sides, and even the highest authorities of the Prussian provinces of Posen, Poznań, Wielkopolska, and West Prussia obtained information from Bernhard's work. It quickly became the standard work on the Polish cooperative system in the provinces of Posen and West Prussia, and was published in 2 further editions. In his study, Bernhard examined in detail the system of Polish cooperatives and farmers' associations, its formation from the middle of the 19th century, its structure and actors, as well as the credit policy of the Polish Volksbanks, Banki Ludowe, which occupied a central position within the system. Bernhard's core thesis is that, with the help of peasant associations and cooperatives, the Polish intelligentsia not only succeeded in addressing and organizing large sections of the Polish population, but also in mobilizing them for the national movement and establishing a kind of Polish cooperative republic in the Prussian German state, the community that the economist addressed in the title of his book. For Bernhard, cooperatives were thus a tool for the socialization of the Polish population in the Prussian eastern provinces, an assumption which my following remarks will confirm. But were they a contribution to the emergence of a civil society? I would like to explore this question using the example of the Polish cooperative system in the Prussian province of Poznań, Wielkopolska, before the First World War. I will try to determine the civil society potential of the cooperatives in a first step at a more abstract level, and I then will juxtapose the theory with the reality in a specific case. the case of Wielkopolska. I will examine separately the integrative and disintegrative tendencies of the Polish cooperative system in the province of Poznan. On the one hand, mobilization and socialization. On the other, national disintegration and paternalistic leadership structure. The picture presented is decidedly ambivalent. The elites of the Polish cooperative movement succeeded in organizing large parts of the Polish population in the Prussian province of Poznan, in mobilizing them ethnically, and in forming ethnically conscious elites in the economy and local administration, who continued to perform important functions even after the foundation of the Polish state in 1918. The price for this, however, was considerable. The national division within the cooperative system and its national political instrumentalization not only further enhanced the social line of conflict, but the paternalistic style of leadership, which was a basic prerequisite for fulfilling the national political function, could not be reconciled with civic values and democracy. So, the relationship between cooperatives and civil society, or the democratic approaches that may be identified as such in relation to East Central Europe, seems ambivalent. On the one hand, the cooperative system in Europe developed as a part of a broad stream of the association movement, and it was certainly no coincidence that not by chance that Hermann Schulze-Delitzsch still called his first cooperative associations. And since the passion for associations also began to encompass the petty bourgeois, peasant and proletarian classes, the cooperatives moved towards democratic principles, social self-organization and solidarity in solving everyday economic problems. On the other hand, cooperatives were nothing more than economic enterprises that could only justify the existence in the emerging capitalist economic order if they achieved market success. The cooperatives thus stood in an area of tension between the state, the market, the family, and civil society. And they also had other intersections with the state, for example, the policy of promoting the cooperative system and the family economic organization of many enterprises. The frequently ambivalent positions of the cooperatives were partly a consequence of the historical development outlined above, and partly due to the programmatic writings of the cooperative pioneers and the cooperative laws which determined the place of the cooperatives in the economic order. Starting from the assumption that cooperatives had an economic and social function in history, the economist and cooperative researcher Georg Draheim developed the concept of the dual nature of cooperatives at the beginning of the 1950s. What is interesting in Draheim and for many German cooperatives is that they connected their many of them connected their scientific and practical activities during their life. Draheim also started as a practitioner of cooperatives, so to say. According to Draheim, cooperatives are joint enterprises supported by their members, which are subject to the rule of the accounting pen, Herrschaft des Rechenstifts, as he called it, and thus function according to rational economic principles. However, Draheim also states that cooperatives are associations of individuals and not impersonal associations of capital, such as joint stock companies. The central position of the person and not the capital brought in by him has important consequences for the cooperative's goals. Its performance is measured not only by market success, but also by the fulfillment of social goals, such as the integration of the cooperative community. For example, partial reintegration in response to the general disintegration of the capitalist age. Nevertheless, cooperatives remain dependent on economic success. Cooperatives which continually fail to achieve market success simply disappear from the market and are thus unable to achieve their social goals. Conversely, Economic performance depends on the fulfillment of social goals. Only a community built on civil society resources such as trust, responsibility, and participation is capable of successfully managing a cooperative in the long term. Market success and integration are therefore closely linked. However, the achievement of a positive balance between economic and social performance first requires the creation and then exploitation of the three civil society potentials of trust, responsibility, and participation mentioned above. The principle of cooperative democracy, which is constitutive for the cooperative movement, serves this purpose. The principle of democracy is formally anchored. The supreme decision-making body of the cooperative is the General Assembly of all its members, which must be consulted on any fundamental decisions on business policy. All members are represented at the general meeting according to the principle of one man, one vote. That means one vote each, irrespective of the number of business shares. In societies where the participation of the individual was predetermined by income or asset based on the old liberal principle, the egalitarian cooperative organization possessed considerable democratic potential. The purpose of the principle of democracy is to strengthen the participation of the individual cooperative member in the joint enterprise's decision-making and to increase the feeling of responsibility towards a common cause. Checks such as the principle of joint liability for the deaths of the cooperative contributed to this in another way. The creation of the resource of trust, on the other hand, is achieved by the transparency of the decisions of the board of directors, which represents trust at the General Assembly vis-à-vis the members. In this way, another civil society resource, the public, is created at the same time. The cooperatives thus have considerable civil society potential, both in history and cooperative theory. Now the more practical historical part of the whole thing. Just some remarks on the province of Wielkopolska. The society of the province of Poznan, as it was called in German, crossed into the bourgeois era of the complex combination of economic, social, and ethno-religious conflicts, which since the middle of the 19th century have increasingly been interpreted as ethnic in nature. These lines of conflict had a decisive influence on the development of the Wielkopolska cooperative system. The dominant class in Wielkopolska's economy, the land-owning aristocracy, was mostly Catholic Polish, less often Protestant German, and the urban population was to a considerable extent Jewish and Protestant German. The rural population was almost exclusively Catholic Polish. Religious and national allegiances usually coincided. Catholic usually meant Polish, Protestant usually German. According to official statistics, around the year 1910, the population of the province consisted of 38% Germans, including 2 or 3% of Jews, and 61% of Poles. Due to the history of migration, the proportion of the German population was higher in the western and northern peripheral areas than in the center and the east of the province. The province went through a process of, we can say, reorganization since the 1820s, when the Russian market was fended off from the province, and the Wielkopolska province became an agricultural hinterland in the rapidly industrializing regions of the West and Central Germany. There was no notable industrial development, with only a few industrial enterprises in existence. Trade and commerce were organized on a small scale, serving mostly the local population and seldom opening up to larger markets. Capital poverty was an obstacle to development in all sectors of the economy of Wielkopolska. So in this context, the foundation of cooperatives had a huge economic potential for the small scale producers in Wielkopolska. The first cooperative, which were established in the province of Posen at the beginning of the 1860s, mostly municipal advance funds based on the principles of Schulze-Delitzsch, were multinational and had both German and Polish members. However, disputes soon arose about the language of business and negotiation in some of them, and in some cities, with the majority Polish population, the nationally conscious Poles began to establish their own parallel cooperatives. The ethnic principle was also constitutive for the foundation of the Polish Association of Commercial and Agricultural Cooperatives, the Związek Spółek Zarobkowych i Gospodarczych, in 1871. It was founded as a central association for 29 Polish cooperatives from the provinces of Poznan, West Prussia, and Silesia. If you take a look at the individual cooperatives, however, they have never been homogeneous, Polish or German. Mostly we have cases of up to 10–15% who belonged to the other nationality. Until the second half of the 1880s, the Polish cooperatives in the Prussian East